Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the challenges facing South African President Cyril Ramaphosa as he settles into a new term in office. We continue now with our panel, and Abdullahi, let me start with you. Let's talk about another key issue for Cyril Ramaphosa and for South Africa, and that is land reform. There was a government audit that was done in South Africa. 72% of the country's land is in white hands. How does he address that without scaring people?
I think Cyril Ramaphosa has to take some really hard choices, and that will involve some political costs, and that will involve some, business, economic costs. Because at the end of apartheid, 60,000 white families owned 86% of the land, and in 1999, Nelson Mandela and the team said that they would want 30% of those to be transferred. As of now, I think only 8% have been transferred to the hands of Black South Africans. And therein lies where now Julius Malema and the other groups have now exploited that. Because for Cyril Ramaphosa, who is also a businessman, he is looking at a land reform that was undertaken in their board next to them in Zimbabwe. He doesn't want to go that way. But at the same time, he cannot allow the condition that is available as of now that can fix itself. During his State of the Nation address, he mentioned land, over 13 times. He's well aware that the present inequality, poverty, and employment are all in part driven by land ownership, land tenure system. But there are no easy answers to this. He has to face it head on.
Right.
Yeah. Otherwise, he will be having this conversation next, State of the Nation address.
Yeah, Lawson Naidoo, what are your thoughts on land reform in South Africa? There have been these calls for expropriation of white-owned land without compensation, and that has been of deep concern to many.
It has been of concern to many, and I think the ANC were forced into taking that position by the EFF to pursue this policy of expropriation of land without compensation. But I think the President has dealt with the issue very deftly. He's appointed a task team which reported to him last week on land reform initiatives that need to be taken. That report has not yet been made public. But what the President has consistently said is that there is a lot of publicly owned land that is available, and that needs to be the priority. Government needs to release that land essentially for housing purposes, because I think we need to make a clear distinction between the hunger for land in South Africa compared to what happened in places like Zimbabwe. This is not a hunger for farming land, for rural land. It's really the land issue in South Africa is primarily about housing opportunities in or close to areas where people can find jobs. And there's been a mass migration of people, urbanization in South Africa, and that's created the conditions for the demand for housing. So that's really the nub of the issue here. And if this task team has come up with some reasonable proposals, as we expect that it would, then I think the President in his State of the Nation address tomorrow needs to reveal what some of those initiatives are, how government is going to go about doing that to release public land so that we begin to address this issue. I think the land issue has been unresolved for far too long, and successive governments since 1994 have not taken the issue of land reform seriously enough, have not devoted sufficient attention and resources to it, and that has to change.
Vuyolwethu, the African National Congress, the ANC, it held a national conference in 2017 in Johannesburg. It adopted a number of resolutions at that conference. They became known as the Nazareth resolutions, named after the venue where this meeting took place. Some of those resolutions were seen as being very radical by commentators and analysts, and among them was the land issue as well. There was also resolutions on the status of the South African Reserve Bank. Will Cyril Ramaphosa be able to address these issues, or in another way, could they act as a constraint on him?
He needs to address the issues, because the people voted for the ANC, and the ANC had in its manifesto promised, for example, the issue of the land reform and the nationalization of the Reserve Bank. Therefore, if he backtracks on what they promised as a party during the election period, then none of the people actually take them seriously, because they are speaking in folk tongues. Now, with the land issue, what the President needs to do, he needs to speak consistently on the issue, Because one of the things that leads to uncertainty is when he changes his tune depending on who is he addressing. And also, there might be people who are against the entire notion of expropriation of land without compensation. Now, it is his duty as the president of the country to sit down with each and every person that might be against the land expropriation, sell them the bigger picture. The bigger picture is that this hunger for land from the landless people, therefore, if he does not act or the government does not address that, there will be instability. So to have peace and stability in the country, there needs to be definite action on the matter.
Lawson, another big challenge for South Africa is the crime rate in the country. It had the 5th largest murder rate in 2015, and since then it's actually been rising. Much of that is driven by drug violence, gang violence, as well as what the ANC itself has said is gender-based violence, which has reached crisis proportions in South Africa. What is being done about that?
Well, I mean, I think the important point to note here, Anand, is that, together with unemployment and corruption, crime is one of the key issues that concerns South African people. Land comes relatively low down on the list of their priorities. But efforts need to be taken to revamp the criminal justice system. The police service is in a shambles to a large extent. The specialized anti-corruption unit, the Hawks, has been captured by elements when former President Zuma was in power. Those capacities of the state need to be enhanced in order to be able for agencies to properly tackle crime, to have more visible policing on our streets, to engage with communities and work with communities to try and rid of our streets of gangsterism and crime. And that's something that I think needs to be urgently done. This is a big scar on the face of South Africa, and it affects all people. But it affects particularly the poor and the marginalized, who tend to be easier victims for crime.
Abdullahi, if South Africa is to attract foreign investment, how important will it be for this government to get a grip on crime and dispel this image that we see all over the world that South Africa is a lawless country?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no any other way to put it. South Africa needs to rein in the level of crime that we are witnessing, and it's increasing. I mean, there are a cocktail of issues that is contributing to that. But, revamping the criminal justice system, and the president said he will announce very soon some of the changes to the police service, which, has not been in a great shape. That needs to happen. Otherwise, you do not want to deal with an economy that is already reeling from, poor ratings, unemployment levels, and then you add crime. Yeah. That really wouldn't do well for the investor confidence in South Africa.
Vuyolwethu, these challenges that President Ramaphosa faces, they could not have come at a worse time for him, because we look at the global economy, and much of the global economy is being hit right now by this trade war fallout that we see. How much of that will impact South Africa as this trade war continues?
It will definitely impact South Africa, because China and the USA are our biggest trade partners. However, I think many South Africans do not like the notion of always shifting the blame. If you look at in the previous administration, you find that a lot of times apartheid was the issue and was the blame. So now many South Africans will not understand or accept that this trade war between USA and China is to blame for anything that is going wrong in the country. Therefore, as he said in his speech, that it will be a difficult and hard period. Therefore, he needs to understand that he needs to put practical action to whatever that he has been saying, by making sure, firstly, corruption is rooted out, because once corruption is rooted out,
right,
there will be more resources for the state to be able to do its work.
Thank you. We have run out of time. Thanks to all of you for being with us. But before we go, another reminder about the Heats podcast. You can listen to some of our great content through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. The podcast covers similar global stories that we do here on the show, but it also includes some personal and candid interviews with our guests and correspondents. Just search CGTN and you'll find it. Thanks again for watching.